seem to be the case, that getting rid of said evil would be a good thing. You said that you said that evil is just a privation. So for one, you still have the problem of explaining why all this privation of good is happening. Because it's better for there to be good than a privation of good. So why is there all this privation of good? As Sobel pointed out. But second of all, if evil is just a privation of good, well, I think that's wildly implausible. So consider two worlds. World one has just nothing. There's no sentient beings. World two has infinite people being infinitely tortured. Which world's better? Well, I would say that the world where there's nothing is way better than the world where everyone's being infinitely tortured. And yet neither of those have any good on the privation account. But if there's nothing bad about evil, if it's just the absence of good, then two worlds both not containing any good would just be the same in terms of how good they are. So
I guess my question there would be, how can we tell that the world with nothing is better? And I'm not asking that in the sense that, oh, of course it's better, right? I'm saying, what standard are we basing that on? Right.
Well, oh, sorry, good.
I was just going to say, like, if we're basing that on some sort of standard, and the standard has to be a standard of good. So if the evil world is worse, then there has to be a good that it's contradicting. There has to be a good that we're comparing it to. For example, if I were to tell you a lie right now, we know that that's bad because I could have told you the truth and I chose not to. And that's why I'm saying it's a privation of the good, because whenever we're talking about evil, we're necessarily, like, you can't have evil without good, but you can have good without evil. And that's kind of where the theist comes in, is that, like, I could have a perfectly, like, when I tell you the truth, it's just a good thing. I don't have to think about evil to talk about good and talk about truth. But when I'm talking about a lie, I'm saying there was a good there that could have taken place, but it did not. And I think, so when we're looking at that universe example, I would say that we're having to base that on some kind of standard, which means that there's goodness there and it exists.
Wait, so would you just I mean, what I would base that on is intuition. And I think that what seems to us to be the case is generally a decent guide to what is in fact the case, particularly if we have reflective seemings about the world that are principled. But I mean, would you really just reject that a world of infinite people being infinitely tortured was just as good as non-existence? Is that really a claim you would make?
No. That wasn't what I was saying. I'm saying that the reason we know that it's worse is because there's a standard that we're basing that on. And that was the claim I'm making.
Yeah, I agree that there's a standard, but I don't understand why that standard entails that evil is just the absence of good. So if evil were just the absence of good, then if there were two worlds, both of which didn't have any good, it wouldn't matter how much evil they had, because evil is just what you get when you don't have good. But the world with infinite torture would be way worse than the world where no one's happy or sad at all, where no one exists. It shows that evil can't just be a privation of good.
Well, I mean, I think that I would just push back, because going back, and once again, I'm not making the claim that the one where the infinite evil is definitely worse than the universe that you're positing that has nothing existing at all, right? I think that personally that's an impossible world, because I think God is a necessary being, but we'll just neglect that for a moment. But
okay, we can just say apart from God's creation, because presumably you think God was free to not create anything else other than him, right?
Sure, but even if he didn't create, he would still exist. So there would never be nothing, from my view.
But would God have been free to create an empty world where there was no life?
I'm not sure, because I think when God created, he created time and space itself, and so I'm not sure how that would work, because if before the creation moment, classical theism would hold that he was in a timeless state, which means that no change happened. So he was in like a perfectly changeless state. And so from the moment of creation, now he's in time and, experiencing the world along with us. And so I would say that it's hard to say that if he made a decision, time would have had to begin. And so something, I don't know how.
Okay. We can just, to simplify this, make it so that we're talking about what humans are creating. So let's say that humans could either create torture world or nothing world, where one of them is just this expanding, a bubble of space-time expanding into endless darkness with no life. To quote William Lane Craig, no life. just dead and dying stars expanding into endless darkness. And the second world is just pure torture.
Sure.
Presumably, the pure torture world would be worse.
Oh yeah, for sure. But
Okay, so
I
why
guess
is that
then
true? Because presumably the first world doesn't have any good, right? And so
yeah.
if evil is just a privation of good, then they have the same amount. Then there's nothing that both of them have no good, and that's the only axiological standard by which the worlds are being evaluated. So why wouldn't the worlds be equal?
I see the point that you're making. I guess the what I would say back to that is that in the world where nothing exists, I think that uh, it would I would just posit that that would be a metaphysically impossible world because God would exist necessarily, so there would be goodness.
Well, okay,
And then
nothing
so
aside
I would
from
just say
God exists.
from my worldview, that's a metaphysically impossible um, thing to posit. So it'd be
Okay,
like saying
nothing aside from God exists.
it'd be like saying there's a world of infinite evil. I even think that's metaphysically impossible
Well,
because
okay,
God would have to exist.
sure. So we can say that both worlds have God in them because God necessarily exists, but they have nothing else. So one of the worlds just has God, and well, okay, not infinite torture if you have a problem with infinite, but a a trillion people being tortured in the most brutal ways imaginable. And the second world has uh, 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 has just no life, just God hanging out. Um, Presumably, the torture world would be worse.
Oh, for sure, because in one you have perfect goodness, and then the other one you have a bunch of torture, which is a privation of the good. So that would be how I
Okay,
would. I guess I'm rejecting your analogy because I don't think it's metaphysically possible for either of those things to exist. I think
you don't
even
think that? Well, no. So remember, in this scenario, we've stipulated that God is part of the world, right?
yes,
So,
but
um,
I would still just posit that if a world, if even if God created an empty world like you're trying to say, He would still exist, and so the goodness would be there. So
we
it
agree
wouldn't be
that God
nothing.
exists in those worlds, but the question is, just
Yes.
aside from God, which world would be greater?
Okay. I mean, I guess you have to go with the one that where nothing's happening because obviously torture's worse than nothing. So,
Right,
uh,
but if
yeah.
torture is worse than nothing, then torture can't just be the absence of good. Torture has to be actively bad
Hmm. Okay,
because
I
there's
see what you're
nothing good in
saying.
the other world. Yeah.
I see
Um,
what you're saying. I'm just, I feel like there's something wrong with this argument. I'm not philosophically trained enough to spot it, but I feel like I feel like there's something wrong with here. So I'm gonna just
okay.
hold to the fact that I reject that analogy because I think they're metaphysically impossible, and I can't spot another problem with it.
Okay, sure. So